Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Vivian Garcia. I'm a marketing manager on the English team here at Bedford St. Martin's. And we are so pleased to have one of our authors available today for the first of our series in the Bedford English AI webinar series, which will be happening throughout the month of April. Today's session is going to be Perplexity AI, what we can learn about writing by watching Perplexity consolidate information. With that, I'm very happy to introduce our esteemed guest of honor, who I heard Jersey mentioned early. Richard and I are also both in New Jersey, so go Jersey. So Richard E. Miller is a co-author with Andrew Essick of Habits of the Creative Mind, now in its third edition. In 2022, he received the Chancellor Provost Award for Excellence in Teaching at Rutgers due to his career's impact on teaching writing. He is currently working on a creative nonfiction entitled On Living and Dying in Suicide's Blast Zone. So with that, I am very pleased to turn it over to Richard.
Good afternoon, everybody. I just tell you what I see. I actually only see Vivian and Joy, so I really am just speaking into the void. But I want to give a special shout out to Joan Feinberg. How wonderful to see your name in the list there. And Amir Suardi, what a treat. We haven't connected in some time. So very pleased to see your names. And I want this to be as interactive as it can be. We'll be fielding your questions live, and I'll be responding to them as they pop up here. I should start by saying, I've been teaching writing at Rutgers for over 30 years. And my thoughts about the best way to teach writing have changed dramatically over that period. So much so that Andrew Essick and I put together this book, Habits of the Creative Mind, more than a decade ago when we started recognizing just how different students were starting around 2010 when smartphones started to become ubiquitous. And we both really felt this profound urgency to reimagining what it meant to teach students in the age of distraction. So we put together this book that focused on creativity as the central concern that we want to cultivate. I think that's one of the reasons why I was invited to speak today, because you could ask the question, after AI, what does creativity have to do with anything? Artists are worried about their voices being stolen and images and novels being written entirely by AI. It's an entirely reasonable concern to wonder what the near and long future of writing instruction is going to be. I don't have the answer to those questions, but I do have some thoughts about what AI is good at and what it isn't good at, and that's what this workshop's going to be about. Just my thoughts as not a neophyte. I've really devoted myself to learning about technology for the past 20 years. But everybody's pretty new at AI. It's so new, in fact, that when we were creating the third edition of Habits last summer, and I suggested that AI write one of the essays in the piece, Macmillan actually wasn't prepared for that idea. And our editor, Suzanne McLaughlin, had to contact legal and find out, well, what are the legal consequences of citing the text that's been generated by ChatGPT. And there was some pushback against the idea of having students work with ChatGPT rather than against it, or create barriers in your classroom to make sure that AI never entered. Um, I entirely understand those concerns and reservations, but uh, I also don't think there's any way to stop technology from invading the spaces that our students are using to compose in. With that in mind, this essay in the book, which is called On Letting Go of Writing by Formula, um, now has an essay in it written by ChatGPT in response to the question, what's so bad about writing by formula? And in a recursive way, ChatGPT very obediently produces an essay celebrating innovation, improvisation, a very formulaic and utterly predictable argument for why those things are important. Um, uh, but we don't simply have ChatGPT in the book as a fall guy to say, oh, look, how easy it is to make fun of this new technology, which it is. It's very easy to. Um, I don't think it's worth having any writing time spent on activities where you just shoot fish in a barrel. And so we have other creative activities where then the students work with ChatGPT and start thinking about, well, what actually is this thing? Um, so I'm on leave right now, and I um, just as I was going on leave, there was an article in the New York Times by one of a lead writer there talking about one of these incarnations of AI, Perplexity AI, which I had never heard of. But this writer was saying, this really is a game changer. So I signed up for the subscription service and started, as I was working on my various projects, uh, just seeing like, was there a way that AI could help me? And I discovered that there are a couple of things that AI is really, really good at. Uh, um, I think AI is the best free grammar checker out there, and that can be used um, with uh, with students you have who are struggling to write in standard American English. I've come to see that my own preoccupation with certain grammatical errors and punctuation errors is itself an implicit bias against people who have not had access to the uh, high quality public education. And that asking those students to just take their essay, put it into ChatGPT or whichever AI system they are using, and just say, correct the grammar. The results, they are not 100%, not by any means, but they're significantly better, I've found, than word editor and Grammarly. So I don't have any problem with inviting students to take advantage of that. I think it helps to level the playing field when they submit their pieces. And it also, having them do it exposes this thing that AI isn't good at. Um, AI is terrible handling incomplete sentences, and it's terrible handling referent errors. Um, and that's because AI does not read what's in, what's in front of it. And to say that it's reading it is to really misunderstand what's happening. AI is assessing the document for having words in a predictable sequence. It's if the wrong word is there, but it's the wrong kind, right? It's a noun, but it's the wrong noun. It doesn't care. It will work with whatever the student has put in there. And so having it just do a grammar check, not asking it to rewrite, that's really different. Um, But when it does that grammar correction, it wipes out a lot of the very straightforward, simple errors. And then suddenly those problematic broken sentences, half sentences, reference errors, they just float to the top and they're much more visible to the student. So I think that's a real value to it. Um, I also think, speaking now as someone who is a writer and has been turning to Perplexity AI as as I now think of it as my devoted and eager research assistant, uh, that it's I see why the author from the New York Times said that Perplexity was a game changer in terms of search engines. Um, and I think all of us know now that the experience of Googling or whatever you use, DuckDuckGo or Bing or whatever search engine you use, um, that search engine optimization has really bankrupted the process of searching for information. You don't get the best information. You get the information that is most linked to or has been search engine optimized to float to the top. So what you find is what has been most found. Um, and that's in the early days of the internet, it might have been possible to entertain the idea that the most found thing, the most linked to thing was actually the best thing. But I don't think anybody believes that anymore. And it's simply demonstrably untrue. Um, so um, if you look at um, AI and Perplexity AI as a way, as sort of a super search engine, a meta search engine. What I've learned from watching how Perplexity AI answers my questions um, is that it goes out and it finds its answers from trusted sources. What in the old days when we taught with books, right, was what is a trustworthy source? Um, well, it turns out on the internet, fewer and fewer trustworthy sources exist, and largely because of pernicious players who come in and bankrupt whatever site is distributing information. Um, or they search engine optimize things so that lower quality material floats to the top. Um, it, AI is depending upon, if you will, the kindness of strangers. It's the databases where it draws its most trustworthy research from. Wikipedia, which um, is largely almost entirely volunteer work by experts, and an incredible labor goes into that every single moment of every single day of people voluntarily fending off efforts to corrupt whatever information has been put into whatever entry. Um, so Wikipedia is one of its more reliable sources, and then Reddit, the Reddit community, which only last week was privatized and went to the market, and that's going to change the quality of Reddit's information. But for the past 20 years, the Reddit community has been comprised of people who voluntarily share their expertise. Um, so I've noticed that when I'm asking Perplexity questions, that it does a good job of answering. They're questions about technology, unsurprisingly, actually, right? And they're questions that take it to those two sources. Um, uh, so that's incredibly useful if you're working with these very frustrating devices or laptops and finding like I was working with my calendar and I could not figure out using all of Apple's help information. A very simple task, how to add a new calendar. I went to Perplexity, it went out, immediately found the information and provided me the correct way to quickly solve that problem. Um, so that's pretty great. Um, I have ended up using Perplexity because it is such a good search engine, that because it saves me lots and lots of fruitless time casting about for answers to questions that are concrete questions that have concrete answers. Um, it's good at that. And that's why it's a complete threat to all help desks. Give you a concrete example of that. Um, uh, I was uh, I was working with a university provided machine, and I had an external drive. And when I went to the external drive to get a file, it said I didn't have permission. How could I not have permission? All of these files are mine. Uh, I did some searching, didn't have luck. I wrote to the university IT, the departmental IT, and said, I'm having this problem, um, and I need to get access to these files. Well, the departmental IT responded in a kind of cartoonishly IT fashion, which was, um, well, you'll need to bring your machine in. What? You have spyware on these machines where you can come in and fix them remotely. So one, why do I have to come in at all? But two, where's the effort to actually solve the problem? Um, so I went to Perplexity AI again, and I kept asking this question: how can I get access to this file that I'm forbidden access to? And eventually, grinding through all that tech stuff, it found the answer. It didn't have to take my machine in, didn't have to use tech support. It was really a simple, stupid solution, just dragging the forbidden file onto my desktop. And then that, for whatever magical reasons, makes it possible for you to go in, change permissions, and I could look at my file. So I think help desks which are not known really anywhere in any area for being committed, concerned with solving your problems. See, using the American healthcare system as an example. Um, it's really clear to me why AI is going to just devastate those industries where humans occupy those roles of providing support for technical questions. Um, but as teachers, we don't imagine ourselves training our students to become uh, employees at help desks. Right? We're concerned with teaching them uh, how to think deeply, think critically, think creatively. Uh, and you know what? AI can't do any of that, at least not now at the front end as it's available to end users who are not technologically gifted, of which I am one. Um, if you want AI to help you answer a research question that you're concerned about, AI lacks the two defining characteristics that I'm most concerned about in my writing classes, that I'm most concerned with as someone who teaches the humanities. Um, AI does not doubt. It does not question the information that it presents to you. It presents it to you as if it were true. Um, it also is not creative. So it can't look at a problematic answer and then say, wow, wait a minute, I have to disentangle this whole thing and go down a different rabbit hole. I should be asking a different question. It it may get there someday, but certainly right now, it is not capable of productively introducing doubt into this research process, and it's not capable of productively introducing creativity into the research process. Um, so I'll give you another example for that, and then just open it up for questions. But um, while I'm on leave right now, I'm teaching not teaching, I'm leading a really informal a discussion group that meets every Sunday for an hour. Um, and it's on Zoom, a discussion group on Zoom. And what we're doing is what a practice that I recommend in Habits of the Creative Mind and that I've been doing at Rutgers for the past 10 years. But we've taken a text and we're reading it in slow motion. Um, so, and that means we meet for an hour every week and we've read 10 pages. And the text we're reading is Joyce's Ulysses, text I have never succeeded in making it as far as I've made it now. I've certainly never finished it. And in the group of about 10 people, there's only one person who's actually read it all the way through, and she did it as a first year student at Bryn Mawr 30, 40 years ago, where they read it in 2 weeks, which is an astonishing feat. And that was done before AI or any technology. Um, uh, so we've been reading this slowly. It's this utterly confounding novel. Um, and we're only 80 pages in. We've been at it 10 weeks and we're only 80 pages in. And we've reached a point where Leopold Bloom has received a letter uh, addressed to Henry Flowers. So Leopold Bloom has a pseudonym. So this woman's writing to him under a false name, and her name is Martha. And in the letter, it's a very short letter, but she says 4 times to him, "You're naughty. You're naughty, naughty, naughty." And so when we had the discussion, uh, and in my reading in slow motion groups, you're not, you can look up anything you want before we meet, but when we're in session, there's no other technology than being in session. So there's no checking your email, or there's no chatting, there's no going in and Googling, there's no going to Perplexity AI. There's just the words on the page. And that then generates questions that you might pursue further later. Um, but we're in this letter, and there's a considerable discussion about what the meaning of naughty is. What was the meaning of naughty in 1904, the year that the novel is situated in? What was its meaning in 1922 when it was first published? Um, and how might we determine what what is going on in the use of this word naughty? Um, so, as an English professor who loves the OED, loves the history of words, loves lexicography, when we finished, I just loved that this question had bubbled to the top and that we were all looking at the text and trying to figure out what the word meant in context, but also that was just causing us to say, there's not enough context to figure out what the word, uh, to really nail down what the word means. Um, so I started to do research into the meaning of this word, and I went to the OED at first. Um, and it did what the OED does best, right? It gives you the history of the meaning of the word from 1400 forward. Uh, and you see the problem with the OED's own way of searching masses of words. Uh, when it's going to determine what naughty means, or any word it means, it looks out at the world of texts that have been published since 1400. Um, and those texts are, over that period, largely dominated as texts written by men. Um, uh, And the text that the OED feels it can look at um, are not necessarily the text where you might learn the meaning of naughty. Um, so I was looking through this and very unsatisfied with what the OED said. It didn't answer the question. It told me about how naughty could be used reduplicatively as a mild form of chastisement. Um, I don't know why those balloons went up behind me. Um, uh, but it it couldn't tell me the history of its potential other meanings. Um, so I went out to the Gutenberg collection where you can find other piles of words to look through. And I looked through three central texts in early erotic literature, only to discover that the word naughty didn't appear in two of those books at all. And in the third one, only appeared on the first two pages when the main character is extremely young. Um, so I'm like, wow, this is really an interesting problem. How do you find out the use of a particular word in Ireland in the early 20th century, its meanings? Well, I learned some things, right? If you go um, to Google and you say uh, naughty 1900, um, you sure don't find what I was looking for. Um, so I went to Perplexity AI and I said, you know, I'm looking for texts from around 1900 that have the word naughty in them so that I can look at the meaning of the word. And you know what AI told me? It said, you should talk to your partner. Uh, it said, I am restricted from providing information in these areas. Uh, and that was it. Like, it turns out AI, it can't imagine an intellectual pursuit into the meaning of a word in what is deemed in some rankings the most important novel in the English language of the 20th century. Just trying to find out what one of the words here means. AI, wall comes down, Puritanism comes in. That kind of inquiry is out of bounds. Uh, and that was really striking to me because if AI is so prudish about something as tame as that, what if you're digging into questions like genocide, slavery, uh, war crimes? Is it going to say you're not allowed to look at those things? They're too disturbing. Um, so so that's the arc of my experience working with AI. I'm enjoying it. I enjoy seeing what it can and cannot do uh, because engaging in that activity, it not that I've been worried about this, but it confirms my own sense that there's still a very important place for writing instruction at any level that emphasizes creativity and curiosity. Um, Teaching people how to write clearly, how to write memos, it never interested me in the first place. And I think AI will take care of that kind of work. Um, but for the time being, I feel really confident that AI can be a useful little research assistant at your side and at your student's side, uh, helping them as they're thinking about questions, but um, it can't do the work, the important work for us. Um, and so my recommendation is uh, it you should teach your students to use it to play with it. And in the playing with it, you learn its limitations. So I'll stop there and open the floor for questions, concerns.
So I've seen a question come in. Do you think that's truly a constraint of AI systems or the commercial interest concerns of the companies that build these systems? I think it's important to distinguish between what the technology can do in a platonic sense and what kind of guardrails people will put into place to protect their interests. Consider also agriculture to feed the world versus Monsanto.
Uh, well, you've answered your own question. And of course, I agree. I mean, it's the people who know how to access AI and use it, not as a front-end user, subscriber like me, but somebody who has access to it without those guardrails. There's no limit to what information they could draw from the large language model bases that they have. So absolutely a corporate guardrail. Um, and again, that's one use of playing with it. Um, so uh, I think that's a great question. It's you play with it and you say, well, why can't it do this? And most certainly, it could have gone to Gutenberg itself and looked through all those texts and helped me find ones where this word signified. But for corporate reasons, that they want to make it appear that it's not going to aid someone in prurient interests, which is truly ridiculous. If if you think about what I saw when I was writing my blog post up about this, and I realized, Martha never would have read those classics of Victorian pornography. So where's she getting the word naughty from? And I'm like, and I went to Pamela. And naughty appears in Pamela 33 times. I started to get pictures from Pamela from Richardson's 1750 epistolary novel, and I was putting those in my blog post. Um, and I wasn't thinking, right? Because I was thinking, like, people use naughty for this and naughty for that. And, so I just typed in like a naughty dog. Um, it really wasn't thinking because I wanted an image to put in my thing. And the internet didn't have any trouble providing triple X-rated images instantly for me to look at. It's just that AI was fearful of the language. Um, uh,
A few more questions come in. One is a comment from Amir Sahawardi saying, I'd like to join that reading in slow motion Ulysses Sunday discussion group, please.
all
So if you
right.
could follow
I'll,
that up.
yes, I'll send you the link. We'd love to have you, Amir.
And then for the next question, do you have any suggestions on how to introduce ethical use of AI for introductory writing classes, particularly composition to help students, or suggestions on some activities to help students? So you'd mentioned earlier already using it as a grammar check. Is there anything else that you'd recommend?
Well, I think what you learn through play with it is uh, I I think play is such a great uh, way of learning and teaching. So there's one model to say, you come in when you say, now we're going to learn the ethics of AI, and that means you can use it this way and you can't use it that way, and this is approved and that's forbidden. What the students get are the laws from on high, but they don't actually get an interior understanding of how or why one might be concerned with these issues. And so as the exercise we have in the book and with the grammar issues, um, uh, I use those as ways to say, play with it. And then you'll find yourself in playing with it where you'll start to learn as you learn in any game you play. If I do X, that destroys the game. There's no game anymore. All right. So if I go to the first thing I ever did with AI, because I was utterly skeptical of it, and I was teaching a slow motion course on, no, I was teaching a uncommonly taught James Baldwin novel, Another Country. And I just like, what is this? And I went to it and I gave it my writing assignment. I said, write me an essay on another country that cites from the text 3 times. So there you go. Like, okay, you're playing the game. That sort of takes the whole game of writing, thinking, reading out of it. AI instantly just generated this essay. I was astonished. Um, and and then I started to read it, and I'm reading the quotes, and then I had this really common experience once you start playing with it. It's like, none of those quotes are in the book. They made them all up. There's something that prevents it from citing from actual novels. I don't know what it is, or maybe the novel wasn't well known enough, but it just made them up out of whole cloth. Okay. So, but you learn that by playing with it. And you say, okay, well, you don't want to write the paper, do this. Well, that's cheating. We know what cheating is. But if you think of it as, well, how do I inhabit this writing assignment in such a way that I'm going to learn? AI can help you, but it can't help you if you're going to say, do the work for me. Um, Similarly, with the grammar checks, it can correct those surface errors, as I said. But when you play with it, and if you go in after it's done that and you say, fix all the run-on sentences, it becomes utterly incoherent because it's not reading. So it says, I need to fix this sentence and it needs to have a subject and a verb and an object. And well, there's a subject, and it just grabs one out of its hat in the surrounding words, and what gets produced is nonsense. But you learn that by playing with it when there are no consequences, when there's nobody coming up and saying, caught you cheating. Um, I also I'm sure you've experienced this, but I've already received essays that students have tried to pass by me that were written by AI. And I, in my earliest incarnation as a teacher, I would have tried to get those kids kicked out of school. And I think that that's the wrong response to this tool, to this moment, to the challenge of teaching people how to write now. Um, it's if you go to the person's, as I did to both students who did this, like, uh, I know you didn't write this. I know AI wrote it. I mean, I know you didn't pay somebody to write it because it's got all the telltale signs of AI. And one of the ways people say, at least at Rutgers, like, how do you know it's AI instantly? There are no grammatical errors. Uh, but that's a negative test. It's more like this isn't the kind of reading I'm interested in, the kind of writing I'm interested in. AI cannot generate a self that then can take an interest in how language works. And that's what my classes are about. There's no way to fake that. Um, so that's how I would do it. My answer to you is let them play with it. And then as they play with it, start to have conversations about, well, what ruins the game? What feels like cheating when you're using this? And then how can we find ways to use this tool uh, to help make our writing better? And I think it can help do that, but as a teeny weeny little assistant on your shoulder, not somebody at the steering.
Okay, so we have a few more questions that have come in. How do you balance environmental concerns with your use and encouraging use among students? How much, if at all, do you foreground resource depletion or water usage on a per query basis? And parentheses, again, from an interest in balancing and informed decision making versus trying to prohibit an emerging technology.
I think that's such an important question. When we were doing the first edition of Habits, we had essays about the next war, the next central concern for the globe is going to be access to clean water. And any eh, having your students come to understand not simply the energy use, but the amount of water that's required to keep these processors cool so they can process all this information. and the profound environmental consequences of that. Uh, That's all part of the project of using it. I think those questions have to be on the table. You have to be helping your students think about them, but you also have to be insisting that at this moment in time and history, binary thinking doesn't work and it doesn't help us. So being for or against technology is meaningless. Being for or against using computers is meaningless. Uh, the question is, how can you use these tools to construct a better world? And what I say to my students all the time is, you can't build a better world if you can't imagine one. And so what we have to cultivate in our classrooms is the acts of imagination. And imagination doesn't prosper in an environment when, as soon as something peeks its head above the ground, you chop it off and say you're growing in the wrong direction. I think we have to have a capacious classroom that allows for students to struggle with how we are all implicated in global warming. There's no safe space that any single person can stand in and say, I'm not contributing. Uh, so that isn't a useful form of the conversation for me. The useful form of the conversation is, how could we begin to imagine ways of creating a world, an inhabitable world, where this technology wasn't leading to our destruction?
And this is less a question than a comment from something you noted earlier, but large AI companies have intentionally limited their AI models from generating text about sex, violence, war, and hate. This means directly that the training data they use is suffused with problematic and biased content. Human beings are being employed offshore, underpaid to filter this horrific content, but in censoring this content, as it should be censored at a certain level, these AI models also censor any content about these issues. In other words, we can clearly see here the ethical and moral problems with outsourcing our thinking and writing to generative AI. And the same professor, Professor Albert Crane, said, forgot to add, this presentation is a wonderful explication of these serious problems.
Thank you so much for that comment. And even before AI, um, the outsourcing of that editing process of horrifically awful material at Facebook, where people have had to scan all of the videos that people are posting, and having to watch beheadings and vile sexual acts, the depravity of humanity. Technology certainly gives you a front row seat there. Um, but and the psychological damage that's happened to the people who are charged with that role of then having those images in their heads is another hidden cost of using social media. Um, so I think again, this is a place where binary thinking doesn't help us. As you've clearly acknowledged in your response, it's not don't have the sex or do allow everything. It's how on earth are we going to produce ways of using these tools that don't simply result in profound human damage? Um, and I spent 3 years working in a social work program here at Rutgers as a much needed escape from teaching in English. And during that experience, I had a front row seat at the consequences, both of what you're describing in terms of how information gets curated in advance, um, but also then how practitioners fear doing certain kinds of research because it will leave digital traces behind. So I worked with this woman. She wrote a fantastic dissertation on what it was like working in place where pedophiles are incarcerated. And so she worked face to face with criminals and perpetrators of crimes of really horrific character. Um, but what she had to contend with in writing this dissertation was what it meant to leave this digital trail behind where she herself was doing research into pedophilia. So how do we begin to construct a world where you say curiosity should allow you to look into shady, shadowy, dark corners? That's what curiosity does. Um, and then protect our students from the consequences of being curious. I think those are live, hot questions, but they're not to be avoided, I don't think. Um,
So the next one, what, if any, are the positive implications of AI for creativity? And since your book is called Habits of Creative Mind, has using AI become a habit for you and how?
oh, I love that question. Um, uh, I think there's no question that AI can be used creatively. It's a tool. Tools can be used creatively. Um, that's not my interest, but I'm not against it. My interest as a writing teacher is in the student's encounter with the self and what happens when you try to put the self into language. That's what I'm concerned about. If AI can help with that process, yes. Um, uh, is it a habit for me? Um, I've definitely become a habit, but not with my writing. One of the things I've done to prepare for retirement is I've opened an eBay store to sell stuff so that I can raise money for my preferred charities. And the best research assistant I can have who can answer any questions for me that I have about how eBay works, how the postal service works, what happens when you lose your mail, blah, blah, blah. Perplexity AI is there, ready to answer my question. It doesn't care how dumb I am, doesn't care how many times I've asked the question. I love it for that. But I I have tried to get it to help me with this sprawling book that I've been working on now for 7 years and is is just a pile of words still. Um, it it can't answer my questions about how to produce a big thought. And that's, a big book, a big essay, a long essay. So how do you have a big thought? Um, the internet is not interested in big thoughts. It's interested in speed and quickness, and so it can answer a question for me about marketability. I actually asked it if like, would this be a good title? And it gave a thoughtful answer because I think because it was a marketing question. Um, but the key questions I have in writing this, like voice, pacing, structure, how do you get write something that people will voluntarily continue to read? For me, the experience of moving from working as an academic writer, where people either read your work or they don't, but it doesn't matter in some large sense. That is, it still goes on your CV. It's still out there in the world. It exists. Because those publications are not profit generated driven. Trying to write a book that might make it out into the mass market, I'm just more aware than I've ever been of how outrageous it is to ask anybody for their time. And this is something we return to over and over in the Joyce book, which is like, what? I mean, it's 600 and some pages long. I mean, whoever read this, whoever actually took the time, who actually ever understood it? I mean, maybe there were people, but the amount of information and knowledge you need to have to be able to understand that is so profound. The ask that Joyce makes of his reader in terms of time is an outrage. And it's not one that the internet entertains. Can you imagine if the internet responded to one of your queries with, well, here's a 670-page tone poem, and good luck. So that's a wandering answer, but it's always gonna be there now as the best search engine in my pocket. That's the habit for sure.
Thanks, Richard. And what I just realized, because someone asked earlier about the books, I'm going to leave the screen up while you're talking.
Mhm.
But I've got the next question. If anyone's interested in a copy, you could definitely email me, and we're happy to take care of that for you. So the next question is, should teachers train themselves in AI prompt engineering? Might that cause us to enunciate the logic of our own pedagogical assumptions in a way we never had to before?
Uh, uh, I'm going to confess, Amir, can you define that phrase, AI prompt engineering? Um, I don't know what it means.
So he'll probably enter that in Q&A. So in the meantime,
Okay.
if you want to answer the next question,
Uh-huh.
it comes from Professor Romsberg. AI gives us the most popular common answers, and many of my students gravitate towards those as well. So if AI is reinforcing for them what they think is, quote, right, how can we use AI to help them push past this?
It's a great question, Rod. And it's what actually got me to use it in the chapter on how to let go of formulaic writing. That essay has a funny history, and I want to speak to it so that I can get to I think, a productive answer to your question. Um, that essay's been in all three editions of the book, but when we first wrote it, um, at the last minute, it was determined that it could not be published as it was because we cited as an example of a pedagogy of formulaic writing a very, very prominent book in our field, not published by Macmillan, but a blockbuster, a dominant text in our field. And for reasons I never actually did understand, the determination was that we could not use that example from that text. Um, so that really put us in a bind because the question then was, okay, well, how do you find examples of formulaic writing? It sounds obvious. Well, they're formulaic, they're everywhere. Um, but the search for the 5-paragraph essay online as exemplary, it turns out to be a much more difficult process than we had imagined. Um, but the essay sort of stumbled along on crutches with that as the issue. Like, we know we're surrounded by formulaic writing, but why is it so difficult to find an exemplary piece of formulaic writing? So come along the third edition, and voila, AI did that in a way that was acceptable to Macmillan and allowed me to bring that into the book as here's an example of formulaic writing. And so I think what you can do with your students, and this is what we recommend in the book, is yes, it absolutely confirms what they want to hear. So first you have them use it to confirm what they think, and then you just give it the instructions. And this is what we do in the book. It's like, okay, now make the argument not why creative compositions are so much better than formulaic writing. Now make the case that formulaic writing is so much better than creative writing. It's just a machine. It says, okay, and it churns it out. It churns out what you want to hear, the answer you want to hear. Um, and so when you put those two next to each other, I think it helps make clear that what the machine is currently capable of doing. It's capable of producing formulaic answers that confirm the biases of the question. Uh, and that's not writing, that's not thinking, that's summarizing. And somebody might say, no, that's rhetoric. I was like, no, rhetoric in the most positive sense involves persuasion. It involves attention to detail, attention to audience. AI is just not interested in detail or audience. It's interested in here's what that kind of argument would look like for a generic person. So I would just say, when you see them using it to confirm whatever answer it is, then you turn around and say, okay, ask it exactly the opposite to prove exactly the opposite point, and then put those two together. And then you have to write the essay that's at the intersection of that. So Amir's, thank you for giving me
Clarified.
the clarified what prompt engineering is, such that it can be interpreted and understood by a generative AI model. How to talk to a machine. Yes, yes. Okay. So prompt engineering, in a funny way, Amir, I would say what I've learned over the past 3 months, and this is what happens in play. The machine's been teaching me how to ask questions in the way that it can understand them, right? So it's not interested. How could the machine be interested in my actual questions and concerns? But you find out as you play with it that, oh, it's stuck in thinking I'm still talking about X when I've moved on. Or it thinks I wanted to hear why I shouldn't do X. And then you have to go back and you have to rephrase the question. And that's actually what happened when I ran into the problem with the forbidden file. I had to figure out what syntax, what terms, and then what syntax to use with Perplexity so that it would then tell me the answer. Um, uh, so that's not actually engineering the prompt, which is you're actually talking about taking the level of a creator and an intervener, which I love. I fear at my age I'm not going to achieve either of those roles. But what I can do and what I can teach my students to do is to see that you're learning how to ask AI questions so that it can answer them is showing you the limitations of the database, the limitations of what it understands to be an acceptable or valid question.
And
Okay, go
I was
ahead.
going to say we're at time, but I'm going to quickly share from Professor Albert Crane because I thought she shared a great link on prompt engineering. So I'll share that with everyone in the chat function. You should be able to see it there, and I hope link to that YouTube video that she shared. But Richard, thank you so much. And I didn't know if you wanted to say anything as your last words, but thank you so much for sharing all your insights with us.
Well, I just want to thank all of you for showing up. I wish I could have seen you. I mean, I mean, we're talking about AI, and the funny thing about teaching in this format is to not actually be able to see the people you're teaching. No matter what happens with technology in my lifetime, I prefer embodied encounters. I prefer being able to see the people I work with. I know learning can happen outside of those parameters, but I still prefer the constraints of being an embodied person.
I totally get that. I'm sort of analog old school myself on some things.
What a treat. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Vivian, for putting this together. Just really great. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you to all of our guests. As I noted, we will be sharing the recording. We appreciate your attending today and asking such wonderful questions. It really was a very engaging discussion.
And thank you, Joy, for helping monitor and pull it all together.
You're welcome.
Okay. So,
Have a good day, everyone.
all right. Bye.